Strohmayer. I work in Northumbria University in England. I co-work with scientists. I'm also the general grad research state, which is kind of cross-faculty research group across the whole university in Northumbria. And I'm here to talk to you today about crafting hopeful imaginaries and exploring systems change work. And specifically, as a focusing on some work I've been doing the last 2-ish years with mothers in recovery who are also involved in care systems. So recovery, we're talking about recovery from addiction, so drug, alcohol, and care proceedings is the process. It's a very legal process where states decide whether or not these mothers take care of their children, or rather say should take children into foster care. So it's not the nicest of topics, but hopefully the work will show a little bit by being and I want to start off where Nima ended, because I think it was a really good kind of segue. It's almost as if we timed it. So boring cash, if that. In my PhD, which I finished in 2019, I did a lot of work with sex work support services and other support services for violence. And a lot of it was thinking about forms. So like data entry forms and what is needed in them and what we don't need in them. So Warren, I'm a big fan. But since then, I'm taking this new thought about thinking about innovation and the stress of innovation and the traumatizing influence of innovation. And so you're thinking more about maintenance rather than innovation and designing tech as process happen. So today I'm going to reflect on this kind of community-based design work to improve care ecosystems, promote recovery, and it's not super digital, but hopefully the process useful because they very much why design those kind of spaces. So I wanted to start my talk with these two questions because we talked about what remains after academic papers are published and how can research insights travel beyond I kind of want to reframe those questions a little bit. So if we want to do real impactful work or activist research or genuinely community-based led work, we need to, I want you to reframe these questions to decenter academia, to decenter applications. So impact, in my experience, doesn't happen after we publish a paper. Actually, it happens as we do work, how we communicate, how we talk about it. We involve all those aspects as well. So it's much more fluid than kind of these two questions suggest. And actually, I think a lot of traditional academic work students who do some research, who writes a paper, publish the paper, maybe you send the paper to a policymaker, and the policymaker reads it, and then, wow, great policy change, woo! I've been working in space for about 10 to 12 years as a researcher, much longer as a volunteer. This is not how these things work in my experience. So instead of asking these kinds of questions, I want to kind of think about and reframe how communities and we as researchers can move between the very porous boundaries of academia with the real world. Some of my biggest bugbears because academia is actually, we are real. And this is a real building, your city. So, we are part of this real world. And so instead, can we ask, how can we involve people in our research? So rather than asking that question, why don't we ask things like, how can our research be of service back to the activists towards action? So these kinds of questions, like what I've got here, are more the kinds of things that I think about. So these come from working more than 10 years in a form of support services. I did a lot of work internationally. I'm from Austria, so I did Austria, but I also lived and worked in Romania and Moldova and a little bit of research in Canada. But for the last kind of 8 years or so, I've really focused my work in the Northeast of England, where I've been living for a long time. And that has been across a variety of different support services, including sexual support services, sexual rights activism. homelessness, domestic violence, crisis response, rebuilding after crisis, criminal justice courses. I often where those kind of things intersect is where most of my interest is. So these are some reports from the Northeast that look into women's experiences of addiction, recovery, and as you can see, there's a lot there. And when I started working on this particular project 2-ish years ago, there was a time in November where all of these publications at once basically came out one week after the other. And then I'm as a researcher, I'm like, why am I even doing this? Like, why are we documenting any people? We have all of this data, all of this information. And me as a lowly little researcher in the design department, how can I, like, what can I add to a report written by a national feminist organization based on peer research for over 2 years? Like I have more than that. Like I just need to listen to that, like instead and work from there. So my experience of being really embedded in the community and kind of trusting these small academic reports as much as I kind of changed my research questions really. So there's an awful lot of lived experience in these kinds of reports. The Strohmayer report in particular is really lived experience centered. But often these experiences are filtered through academic policy language. They're very jargon. They're kind of for policy or local authority audience that really flattens the it comes person is a kind of victim violence or striker violence rather than that really complicated thing that comes with real life. So Minna talked about this communities. I want to go a bit further thinking about innovation. That's already. So we have a lived experience, lots of implications for practice, lots of recommendations. Why are they not really influenced? What is going on? Like this is written by a university, by a national organization, by the political government. What is happening? Why are these things not being implemented? So really the project that we were working on goes with and Laurie Parker is working with me. Like how can we attempt to not only explore that experience or document or understand that, but also that they facilitate or facilitate some kind of change in the ecosystem or things are wrong. So all of this comes from a real anger at getting for doing things that are quite sometimes really harmful, but also at the same time absolutely loving that people get attention. We're funded by the public. It is my job to read. It is my job to learn and to then share that learning. So how can we kind of work towards that? For all these things that like I think are so powerful and such an opportunity in the practice that so rather than going, oh, I wish I could give more work like this, I wish we could do more work like this, I wish we could give more this. Actually just embedding that practice of being so that is how we do a research group, that's how we do projects, how we teach, how we supervise. I'm kind of trying to embed all of that because of that. But also I have a lot of anger and a lot of love for the sector, like that is the kind of where all these reports are coming from. I'm angry that we're like able to document really well, but not implement. And I also really love the people who work in the system. I know a lot of them really closely with friends. And a lot of it is people working in deeply flawed systems. So how can we use design research for complication rather than solution finding? How can we use design research as facilitatory rather than expertise building? And how can we use design research as experimentation and implementation in a risky but safe kind of think about risky. So this quote is Angelika, who's actually also a professor at Keynote. She talks a lot about critical action research as a way of carving open delicate spaces for fragile solidarities that collective priority to unite solutions. And I just think that's really beautiful. But ultimately, how I understand it is how can we use research practice with communities, by communities, for communities, as a way of really igniting a slow fuse. So it's not a quick fix. Policy change is not going to happen. System implementation is not going to happen. How can we kind of create that spark in different people, different communities? So today I'm going to try to walk through this 2-year project that I'm working on in 40 minutes. So we started off with some workshops as we do this workshop. So we had 2 separate sets of workshops. First, we were building on the reports we already know. We wanted to gather just a little bit of information, not really in-depth stories, because we have that. Instead, what we wanted to do is we wanted to chronologically document experiences of care proceedings from mothers in recovery. We then created as our data analysis and interactive quotes from that, and then brought that to a second set of workshops with professionals across social work, recovery services, domestic violence support services, mental health services, to kind of bring back experiences and then creating these booklets based on the professionals' experiences to apply directly with what's. The second phase of the project was in-depth workshops with women living in a special supported accommodation project, where we made little banners with them and talked about what is special about this specific accommodation project. It's the only one in the country that supports mothers in recovery who are at risk of staying off 5 months. So they're super specialists, they're the only in the country. And from that, we created this poster and this quilt a few months later about what works here. So it's not a what works, what doesn't work, what's happening, but rather if we were to create more of these, what do we need? So what is the ethos that a mother recovery service needs to have? Are the roots. The trunk of the tree are kind of where's the mother needs to be, to be ready to stay home and support, to connect to us. And then the top of the tree is what is possible, which we then use again conversation with professionals to document and to kind of discuss what change would become possible in your job as a social worker, as a recovery worker, if we had more services like this, because we know this one works. We know this one's really good. And all of that then led to cross-sector, cross-hierarchy workshops with professionals, but also with experience. So that's where everybody came together to talk about the work and to kind of find problems and explore problems together. So it was not a solution finding situation. And it was really quite interesting to have service manager from homeless service sat next to probation officer, sat next to a woman with lived experience, sat next to a frontline service kind of support, and they were just able to talk to one another based on lived experience. So we brought the data from all the workshops to the session. So they then published in the report, as we do. And a lot of the work actually centers around this report. So this all took about 5 months of work. So from this, it really kind of catalyzed a lot of different conversations in the city. But also it did that because there was a moment for this. We kind of tried to spark that fuse of what's possible, and it wasn't me that made that possible. It really was the way that lived experience was documented and presented in a non-confrontational way. Because a lot of the women, were quite rightly very angry at social workers, where other professionals were not quite useful. But rather than kind of pinpointing at the problem, we understand that people work in flawed systems. So it was really kind of thinking about how we facilitate those conversations in spaces where there's always going to be conflict. There's never going to be a clear solution. And how do we do that in a way that doesn't just stop at this is a problem? How do we kind of bring hopeful ideas and imagination into the space without being really solutions oriented? Because a care proceedings process, no matter how fix-it, no matter how creative, no matter how digital, is never going to be So I'm not saying I've all the answers, but hopefully kind of developing some of these ideas will be useful. So like I said, a lot of the work is kind of based around that report. I now want to talk about, so thinking about that as the publication, both of an academic. What are the kinds of things that happen in the process of talking about this work? Not just as a, here's a report, here's what we learned, but kind of really trying to think from that practice. So the first recommendation we have is to build a shared understanding or basis of understanding. So we learned that recovery services and social workers do not understand one another. They work on completely different timescales. They work with completely different understandings of what risk means, what safeguarding means, and even who they're focused on. So social workers, the majority of them are focused on children's, whereas recovery workers are focused on the women's journeys and kind of well-being. So we said you need to develop a program of knowledge exchange, and we also saw kind of the interactive as a way of building empathy, or kind of a successful way of having these conversations. So from that work, we're now kind of developing a learning circle event actually next week, which was initiated by social work. So this is not me, oh, you need to do more of this thing. This is social work realizing do something and really wanting to take the lead on this. And so social care reached out to our recovery service, and we're now kind of co-designing that. But really importantly, we've also been able to convince the council to continue to do this kind of work. So the initial project, all of this, making such tiny money with the local authority councils, public health commissioner, where she really take a chance of the project. This is not normal research for that. So it's kind of happening slowly, but really importantly, it's kind of not about the intention of trying to do the right thing, but it's a really kind of deep engagement with the process and the outcomes of that project with the whole care ecosystem. So it's not just with lived experience, it's not just with social workers, it's really with the whole ecosystem that they sit with it, that they kind of work and live in. So the digital aspects of this really takes that. So the quilt we designed has some digital elements in it, kind of facilitate a digital hybrid situation to facilitate the conversation, but really it's about designing for dialogue, it's about designing for agonism, it's about designing for exchange in spaces where there's never going to be a good solution, or positive outcomes in some instances. So Nimna talked before about feeling that she's not doing enough for the community. I think that's a very common experience. I experience that a lot. Because doing community-based work often means having kind of finished projects on the end. But it can be a process because people's life are so precious. So I personally find action research, critical action research, for design, really helpful to be able to understand and explore those complicated things I have as a researcher, because while obviously the community-based work is important, I do also think thinking about academia and space I take up within that really, really important. So the quote that's here is from the paper where Deborah, Max, and I reflected about kind of, we just had meetings for about 2 years before we wrote the paper, reflecting about our experiences as academics wanting to do practice work, how complicated it can be, and how exhausting, and how boring sometimes, but also really exciting, really, and like lovely and nice, and all of these really complicated feelings. I find this work by Anne Leopold-Cohen really lovely. They talk quite flexibly about poise and pause and redness and the punctuation. So what does it mean to have a comma in a research? What does it mean to take a moment to just go, okay, am I ready to do this next bit? Am I ready to do the next bit? And they talk about it in relation to the co-design process. So talking about doing that with participants or kind of being ready for that and doing community-based work. But I also think that actually is a really, really valuable way of thinking about doing community-based impactful design research. So it can be absolutely exhausting. sometimes you don't go good enough. Sometimes it's really hard to articulate what we've done when you've had no solution outcome, but actually you've had all these really exciting conversations. And sometimes it can be really hard to say what data actually is. I remember my PhD supervisor, for the of this very small project, literally everything like to the point where I went to all the session wrong. Everything went wrong. But I still had to write, it was my master's thesis, I still had to write a thesis. And then we were talking about like what even is data? Like is that like I write a data? Like what is that? So it can be really complicated. To people just speak about the most basic kind of things that we as researchers getting on methods and methodology. When do the to most work? So much of it is just if you're going to use in the world, rather than it's quite structured. One workshop we'll do, the next thing that we'll do, the next thing. These things just kind of spread around our web, which takes me back to this. So the second recommendation he had was boosting existing good practice. And this is where kind of the whole development comes in. So it's not about new service innovation. It really is about what's already working. Like systems broken or are they working as intended? But we wanted to work now. People are trying to do the right thing. Some people. But there's just competing interests. There's kind of misunderstanding. So how can we kind of see what's already happening that works, like in tiny little nuggets? So there was one recovery service that we have no gender-specific recovery services in the past. So everything is mixed gender. But there was one service that just like as a rogue effort had an afternoon that was gender specific for and like that worked really well. And they did it kind of secretly because it wasn't commissioned. So how you boost those kinds of innovations that happen on a daily basis, either people who are having to navigate these systems as either frontline service providers or by the people who are accessing these services. So here, we really talked about commissioning and rolling out specific services, taking lessons from the support recommendations of the villas, and supporting and funding existing anti-peer support organizations. I'll talk about that first. So when you're talking about rolling out services, a lot of what we hear is women don't engage and don't have the evidence that would change this. Remember this? We don't apparently have the evidence. So instead of kind of arguing and fighting, we said, right, okay, but put your own, let's just do it. Because we know that we can use design processes and design research as a way of pinpointing roots, not only to what's going wrong, but also to enacting genuine what's called and service delivery on technology and all this change that we want to see because we've done that. So here in all of this, people don't engage. It's not just creating investigation. We made it happen. So we worked with National Trust, which is like a cultural heritage organization, the biggest from England, and more than 15 women to do a 6-session co-creative interactive quilt making program that explored the story of Sophia at Delible Hall. It worked with 4 fine arts students. We had a live brief with design students, first-year students that kind of worked at the same time as us on the project. And we just did it. And guess what? It worked. Women showed up, women engaged. We talked a lot about recovery. We talked a lot about the longevity of recovery. Sophia Ann Dunhall, it was herself. She lived 1755 to some 93, I think. And she was addicted to opioids. She was an incredibly wealthy woman. She, I'm not going through the whole story, but she ended up losing care of her child. A lot of similarities with the women that we were working with. Class obviously different, but you know, women could really again do the story, and we explored it. We worked with it, and that we kind of it works. Stop telling me it doesn't work, because it does. So then you go, okay, how can we infrastructure the maintenance of this kind of work? Rather than just, here's a one pony, okay, you can name the gate, but like, what was it actually that worked? So we're kind of developing a tool, this kit. We have the first version of it ready, which was a thank you to the one who were involved, and all of us came from, the women talking about how they want this, how we needed this. I can't keep running this. I have support service. But Lori works in the support service. So it really is kind of how do we then embed this creative practice for practitioners getting access to a lot of things that so we're kind of working on that as we speak. And then we come back to this. The third recommendation was about developing novel services. So you do need a little bit of that. But actually, that isn't as exciting as I might talk about. So it really is funding for research around kind of grieving support following the withdrawal, which does absolutely nothing, no service at all whatsoever. And also, actually, no research. There's one very small service that does some of this, and also develop and implement and implement appropriate actually applicable for coaching. So this would be somebody whose sole job is support the resources. So again, we went, okay, we recommended this, but we know it's not going to be implemented. So what can you do? We can do some more work. So this was a new recommendation. We didn't really know how it would work, what we could do. So we went and we did some more work, which is now leading to some other things. So this was a really exploratory research project, but also with a very intentional long-term vision for implementation. In about a 3-month period over Christmas, I don't know how we took this, you thought about what could implement advocacy look like for the Northeast of England. So we worked with over 50 individuals across 20 support services, 20 of whom worked with lived experience. We did 7 workshops and had many, many more conversations, emails exchanged to really think about this question. We produced this kind of diagram about skills, experiences, and attributes that somebody with this role would need. Facebook work with people who are already doing it, who've done it in the past, and who are kind of doing this work, again, informally on top of their day jobs, because they have to. So there's the long-term vision. We have a team of these people who would do the specific job, who would help women, help people involved, have support services, communicate better, all these lovely things. Great, we have a report, we have another report. We can advocate for that, but what does that actually do? Is that doing enough to come back to this question? So instead of just leaving it there, we know that there are too many women living right now who need to see the implementation. It's nice for people in like 5 years' time we haven't seen, but right now we know there's people who are prematurely dying. So we also designed this women's well-being campus. This was, again, more than 50 women involved. Women don't engage. I don't know what to say. And lots of more conversations with professionals and lots of other women. It is an activity book. It's something really simple, non-digital, not super exciting. It's maybe quite boring as an innovation, but actually it asks really basic questions about motherhood and recovery journeys and how those two intersect. It's a way for women to kind of reflect on their own experiences, but also it's a translation tool for support services. And importantly, we are kind of giving up ownership of all of this, as Mira was talking about. And there's a recovery service that is this summer, actually starting next week or the week after, who'll be kind of making a father for this. And we'll support them with that, but really it's their project. It's their funding for it. So it's, it's been already distributed to 150 are distributed to organizations in Newcastle, but also in Wales, where we did some work, and also in Ohio, US. Supporting people in these situations. So coming back to these questions, what does sustainability look like? what can it be, and how can we use co-creative research to facilitate this change, to facilitate this imagination shift. So when we started this work, when we've got all of these reports, there's a lot of, oh my God, what do we do? We have some recommendations. How do we implement them? It was like the mood around this work really was dramatic. Like it's so sad. Like there were reports that talk about, rates of death and kids are not really getting rich health about that we have the highest rates. They're not college in the country. And kids are not going down, but not. But at the end of the project, we've kind of created this alternative vision. And it's not just us, it's not just there were a lot of kind of serendipitous things that happened at the same time. It's really like chaos in the city with public health, with social care, all working together. Because 2 weeks ago was also when in May, the government published a new set of guidance for social rules. So there's stuff happening alongside the project that we were able to tap into, that we were able to engage in and communicate with. It was pushed by the research. It was pushed by the people who were participating, going, actually, you need more of this, right? So we'll show you that it's possible on a small scale. So do it. Get on with it. You know it works. It's not your pilot study. You don't need another pilot. So these two boxes over here are kind of representative aspects of work. So actually, I should have another one of those above the two projects as well. This one little report has really turned into a box of all the things that are happening in the city. Because of I would argue, because of the hopeful nature of the work, we're not going, you suck. We're not saying processes are wrong. Going, there's nuggets of goodness here. Let's do more of that rather than the you suck thinking job. And that's where I really like Maria Pita or House's core uses the yeah, exactly. I read this and I was doing a PhD years ago, and I was like, yeah, that's so lovely. That's such a nice way of putting it. But with this project, really, yeah, I'm like, more actually, genuinely this. How we are doing this project is genuinely shaping how I think about things, how women are thinking about themselves, how national trust is thinking about this issue, how social care, how recovery services are working together, engaging with each other, and trying and like iteratively moving forward rather than going, we need a big systems change project. It's iterative small change with that wider vision of that situation being really dramatic for individuals. So I want to leave you with this quote from Bonnie Harder and Nikki O'Day. Read the book. I know it's from 1999. Read the book. It's called Information Ecologies. I don't know why it's not famous. It's an information science book. It's brilliant. Talks about technologies as ecologies rather than systems and tools. I just really like this quote. The worst thing that you as researchers, as science, is to act too little of the future. We need to have the hopeful imaginaries. We need to have a vision that things actually can be better. I don't mean small incremental change. I mean a big vision of what can be, and then working towards that big change. And importantly, they also add, we can do this, we can ask too little of ourselves and each other. And I think as researchers, we have a real, we're funded by the public. I think we have a real responsibility to respond to that and to work with that. Not just how we publish or work publish and all those things, but how we actually do the work, think about the work. And that is in service of the public, whatever that public might be for the different projects. I want to leave you with that down. Thank you for your attention. Thank you so much, Angelika. Does somebody have a question? It's not actually that big. You can talk. My question is about kind of how you engage with
different hierarchies, because getting people from different hierarchies on board, I think, can be really difficult, and you need very different skill sets for different.
Yeah, I've been working in the space for 10 years, so this really is the combination so far. Yeah, it's hard. Can tell you some of like the event we had in the with all the different sectors. There's like 30 to 50 people there. The majority of the people that actually showed up, I had to be like, hey, come to this please. And I either Lori or Faye or I from any of our past lives, research and experiences. So it is a lot for the right people, but it is also what I want to see. So, and that again, it's just giving okay, and like having people in your life who are in the sectors that will tell you focus on that. So I have some big worked alongside for a while before I did this project. I was working with a service manager for 2 years on a kind of creative digital heritage access to the process. And I learned an awful lot from her, from just code of the brain with her. So it is doing lots and lots of big things and learning from everything and coordinating. But also, once you have people together, it's less hard. Something I like, we talk a lot in Newcastle, we have these like networks of practitioners and researchers and things. And something that I think is that I learned from one of these networks was, leave power at the door when you come in, and you're just a person with some knowledge, doesn't matter where the knowledge is coming from. And then I will add to that when you leave the room again, think of the power again. And that's how I kind of start the day as well. And that's, people had heard that I needed power and core, we're not just gathered here, but and here actually you're going. Like if you're a commissioner, you learn some stuff, go do the thing. Like you have a different authority than a frontline service provider, but the frontline service provider hopefully also does something and can go do the thing. So it is just a little bit of, no more people having lots of practice across these different things. I just like doing it. I was terrified. It's scary to send an email to the director of public health. But after doing this and like people knowing in the project, because it was so collaborative, like we involved people as experts at every stage, very clear, like I'm a design researcher, I'm not a public health researcher, I'm not a sociologist, which actually helped. I'm not here telling you stuff, I'm just going, look, women have told me this. First, like, what's your focus? Like, do you have similar experiences or something? And then see the professionals as experts, but also as experts, and then kind of iteratively building conversations rather than solution. If that made a huge difference, that people are like wanting to do, like have a quote for one and stuff, and just like that's what we want, right? There's nothing that's really not. So it's not finished, it's not done. I'm not working. Give him a Thank you so much. Great, well, pleasure. I would have a question, and it's really impressive to apply that. I'm something see, I'm this night to see the data, in order to identify the data
looks like. But the analysis is there easy a way to quantify the success of growing so many octopus arms? Content?
I mean,
I got really hard because I mean in the UK I don't know how it is here. Impact is like the buzzword of the moment. And we even have like every 6 years there's a government research quality evaluation of every university. Yeah. And as part of that, it's like an impact assessment of the research. And the understanding of that is you do research, impact happens. And the impact only happens because you did the research. And that is completely counter to my experience, where the research maybe supports the impact, maybe catalyzes something, but actually these octopus arms are not measurable. Some of them maybe. So like the work with the independent advocates and also the cultural heritage work. So the people on the Red Star. And we're like very actively working on implementing these roles with the director of public health, who's like leading this, because they were already thinking about this. Like it's not a, you know, in the impact assessment, it would be, I did this report, and look, 2 years later, the director of public health is like, oh, this is great. But actually, they were already, they knew they had a problem because they had all the reports, but they didn't know what to do with it, and they knew they wanted something of this. So we were just kind of like, here you go. Because we're embedded, because Lori has worked for 20 years in recovery, and she's herself as a mother who's experienced her child's being removed. So it's a bit of that. So quantifying, if we get those fundings, those will be public health research and we'll have to. And then we'll be like, post survey or like interviews with people about the impacts. But as a like, I don't know if we'll ever be able to, like, you know, we did these workshops with social workers. I don't actually know from the 10 that attended what they then go on to do with it. So like, how do you even do that? So bits of it, yes, bits of it, no. I recently learned about, what's it called? There was a method that I forgot the name of for radio analysis, like, what was the thing? What's it called when you drop a stone? Ripple effect analysis. That's what it's called. Which I haven't done, but it sounds very promising. Which is, I think, as it makes sense to me, is like you do a moment and then you can kind of look at the ripples it has. And I guess if you do that collaboratively with some of the people that were involved, they will be able to say, like, I might not know what recovery worker X did with the work because I maybe never met them, but somebody sent them the report. So I might get to sit down with the practitioner I worked with who might then know. So that might be useful. I don't know quantifying. I'm very like ghost balls and see a person. I don't do numbers.
Yeah.